Second book. So one quick thing, we are a finance museum, and that means we've got lots of amazing things in the archives. And Jesse was referring to the Erie Railroad fight, and here is an original document back from that fight, signed by Jay Gould. It's a sheriff certificate from 1869. So we brought that out for fun, and you can take a look at that. We'll leave it up by
and there's a little note on it that says signed in Newark.
I want to thank our co-authors again. The book, Investment of History, on sale now. Please buy it. Thank you for coming. We'll see you again soon.
Interested in American History TV? Visit our website, cspan.org/history. You can see our upcoming schedule or watch a recent program. American Artifacts, Road to the White House Rewind, lectures in history, and more at cspan.org/history.
Each week until the 2016 election, Road to the White House Rewind brings you archival coverage of presidential races. Next, a 1968 campaign film created for Republican Richard Nixon, showing the former vice president meeting voters in New Hampshire and Wisconsin. Nixon would go on to win primaries in both of these states on his way to securing the GOP nomination. He then defeated Democrat Hubert Humphrey and independent candidate George Wallace in the general election, winning 32 states. This half-hour film is courtesy of the Richard Nixon Presidential Library and Museum.
In an age of impersonal political campaigns, New Hampshire is one of the few places where people have a chance to meet the candidates as well as read about them. The New Hampshire Republican presidential primary is the start of the 1968 campaign trail. From the beginning, the candidate who really has been seen and heard by the people of New Hampshire is Richard Nixon.
How did you fellows come up?
You are about to accompany Richard Nixon on the first leg of his 1968 New Hampshire campaign. You'll be with the candidate, his family, and the Nixon staff. You'll hear what Richard Nixon had to say and what people said to him.
I heard all those tales about the necessities of woolies and everything.
Hi. How are you?
Long way from here. Right. I'm glad to find some New Hampshire people finally. All right. Well, Arnold, how'd you get up here?
We'll ride and see how the weather looks up here.
How are the Eagles going to do next year?
We're going to keep fighting.
Richard Nixon has talked about a new vision of America's future. He has said that 1968 is a time to begin that future, and the place to begin is in New Hampshire. On February 2nd, Richard Nixon held his first press conference of the 1968 presidential campaign in Manchester, New Hampshire.
Tell us why you feel that you can win now when you couldn't win in '60.
I have decided that I will test my ability to win and my ability to cope with the issues in the fires of the primaries and not just in the smoke-filled rooms of Miami.
The Nixon schedule for the next 3 days would include a reception, a dinner speech, and conversations with people about issues in public and on television.
In 1968, I'm looking to the future of this country, down to the end of the 20th century. In 1960, I necessarily had to think of the past, also of the future, but to think of the past and to defend it. And in 1968, as you gentlemen will hear in my speeches starting Saturday night, I'm going to be talking about America's future, my vision of that future, and what I think I can do with the years of experience I've had behind me.
We've got a candidate, he looks like a candidate, and he looked like a president.
What will this campaign have that previous campaigns haven't had? Any new things?
I think it will, as a matter of fact. I think it's preeminently going to have a view of the future, and a vision which has been lacking has been woefully lacking in the last few years. It's going to have a long look down the last third of the century to the year 2000, and I think this is important, and he thinks it's important because we're at now one of those critical turning periods when the decisions that are made in the next 8 years, the term of the next president, will very largely determine the whole sweep of this last third of the century, and just where we go and how we get there. And this is the kind of a choice that the public has got to make this year.
As we begin to meet you, we're just so delighted to be here and to find that you put on such a warm California day for us. And, but so that you know who we are, I think you will know Pat, my wife, of course, and this is Julie, and this is Patricia. And we'll be delighted to meet all of you. We hope you can all stay so that we can greet you personally. Thank you very much.
Me too. My sister Julie. Hi, nice to see you. Yeah, I'm from Vermont. Good, good. It's Patricia and
Hello,
Julie.
Julie and I went to camp in Vermont.
Oh, really? Where?
To the Lucas.
Hi, nice to see you. Hello, very nice to see you. You bet. And I love your pin.
Thank you. Hi,
Hello there. How are you?
Hi,
Patricia.
Julie.
Thank you so much. Hello. How are you?
Massachusetts.
I'm Helen
Well,
Cassidy.
yes. Well, you have a great governor down there and fine senators and a lot of those
Got a
people.
fine
right?
president
Yeah.
coming along.
Right. Thank you.
Mrs. Nixon. I'm Helen Beckett
Well.
from Boston. You're not coming to Boston?
Well, thank
must
you.
be.
Well, we're going to come there sometime.
Good,
You
I
bet
hope
we
so.
are, and I'm glad you wore all your buttons. Bless you. Glad you could come. Well,
That's great.
I think that's great. And this is Patricia. Happy to see you. Hello there.
It's the best so far. Yes, I think it's going extremely well. He's in good spirits, and I don't know. It looks like well, this room's pretty well filled, and then a couple of rooms out and back. I think it's going very well. How many hands will he have to shake? It's a flag. He'll have to shake all that are here, and he always does. He never leaves until after they've all been shaken. And he'll have to sign autographs for a while, so it'll take a few minutes.
What are you actually doing here for? Of identifying people, or what are you doing?
No, I'm his personal aide, and I just help take care of him and help out wherever he wants me to.
If somebody comes up who's important or whose name he isn't sure of, do you tell him who he is? Or what do you...
Yes, if I know the person, many times we don't, but he'll remember. It's amazing. He remembers and recalls people from, one lady, for example, he had seen in '52 when he campaigned in New Hampshire, and he recognized her and mentioned what kind of day it was when they met last time. So
Must have knocked her out.
yeah, they're always surprised when he does that. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks. That chair. Thank you. Yeah, you pull it. Post. Jak you post? Ah, hey. That's about the only Polish I know. And the word for friendship.
Saying he did it again. Some man came up and said, "I met you in '52," and he said, "Yes, we had our picture taken." The guy said, "Yes."
It seems to me to be a pretty magnificent turnout. I think I'd estimate at least we've had somewhere in the neighborhood of 600-700 go by already, and I would estimate that we probably have more than 3,000 before the afternoon is over.
Are these people all Republicans, or are they a mixture, or what do you...
I couldn't say looking out here. You can't tell a Republican from a Democrat or an independent out here, but I would assume it's really just a good cross-section of the people of Manchester, frankly.
I was just wondering how many of these people you think are going to be are essentially sympathetic to Mr. Nixon? How many are kind of potential voters?
We don't know how many coming in, but we hope they all will be going out.
Oh, yes. I have complete faith in him. I think he's the man for us today. I think he'll do it this time.
Do you judge a man by his handshake?
No, no. By his past actions.
Al was very, very sincere, very warm, very nice. It was a pleasure.
I think he's a very well-rounded person. He is appealing more and more to the younger generation and to the more people, which is the most important part.
I feel anyone's better than Johnson. Yes, I think he's improved.
Come out, too.
There you go. There you are. There's 3. How's that? 1, 2, 3. That's 50 exactly. All right. How you doing? You a friend of Dave?
Possible friend of Nixon.
Ah!
All the way.
Tell me, is this fellow a good chairman up here? I'm
He's
trying to...
a darn good fellow in every way.
You really think so?
I really think so.
Yeah.
He's a good guy.
All right, good. Well, as a matter of fact, that's what we hear. We got a lot of people said, well, he's too young to be chairman. And I said, well, we need a fellow that's sort of a goer. Would you agree?
I will agree 100%, yes, sir.
Yeah. Are you on his payroll?
No, I'm retired.
All right. You were in the service? Yeah.
In the First World War.
You were in the First World War. What, the big one? Right? That's
yes, right.
What division were you in?
The 73rd Division.
73rd Division.
Heavy artillery.
Heavy artillery. Oh, yeah, the big...
Battery B, 73rd artillery.
Yeah, those were the French 75s you used, weren't
we used the...
Or did you have another kind of a...
We trained on the naval guns.
Oh, the naval guns, right?
The big guns.
The Coast Artillery, sure.
I was in New Hampshire Coast Artillery.
I
enlisted in the New Hampshire National Guard.
Yeah. Well... Gee, you know, it's hard to realize we've had so many wars since then. We thought that was the end of the last one, and then we had World War II, and then we had Korea, and now we got Vietnam. Let's hope we can get rid of them, huh?
Let's do something.
Let's do something. Right. Good to see you.
Awful nice to meet you, sir.
Nice to meet you. What?
Richard Nixon's interest in people, what they think, what they do, and the questions they ask, are the basis of Nixon's television conversations.
You notice that in the television material that's been put together, an effort has been made to put Mr. Nixon in front of a panel of people. Now, he's never met these people before. He walks on cold. He's meeting them for the first time. The panels are heterogeneous. Some are Republicans, some are Democrats, some are independents. One panel is an agricultural group. Another panel is a youth group. Another panel is a business group.
Television is a vital political meeting place. To be successful, a candidate must use the medium, and use it well. Richard Nixon prefers informal, no-holds-barred discussions.
Hi, how are you? See you. Mr. Parker. Burler. How are you? Parker. Where are you from? What's the... Right here. Here.
Mr. Bohannon?
Yeah.
I'm an Dairyman.
Dairy, yes. Yeah, you still have a few cows.
Yeah, we can find it. Look at it.
Yeah.
Mr. Atherton.
I heard they were, most of them were gone.
Yeah, that's poultry.
We've heard a lot about your surplus of fine products, but I believe in a short time it's going to be a shortage instead of a surplus.
Oh, absolutely. As a matter of fact, people shouldn't be screaming about the surplus. We should be thankful we got it. Because, as a matter of fact, too, when that's another thing, we can make a far greater use of that surplus in our foreign policy, I think.
We can get money for it.
It's a great weapon for peace. We can use it effectively. I have a rule about press conferences that some of my professionals on my staff don't agree with. I never plant questions. And I know that most people do. I say most. Many do. I'm not sure that most do. The reason I don't plant them, however, is that the answer then is contrived. Nobody's going to get away with a question where you say, now, I'd like to have this question asked. The other thing is this. I also have a feeling that, generally speaking, where the question is hard and strong and tough, not belligerent, but strong and tough, it gets a better answer. Always save me from what I call the easy questions, where somebody's trying to help me, because the average viewer or listener to that kind of a question says, that's a patsy. That's one of his friends.
Just to restate this question, why do you want to do this? It's such a man-killing thing, and you've already put in time. You've already served your country.
Well, that's a question that, believe me, has occurred to me, too. And it occurs to my family. I suppose that your wife and your children feel even more deeply about their father and husband being involved in a great battle than he himself does, because the man who's in the battle, he can fight back, can answer, whereas those on the sidelines have to suffer in silence. But on the other hand,
The reason that I think perhaps motivates me more than anything else is very simply this. I feel that this is the period in the history of the United States in which what we do or fail to do can determine the future of peace and freedom for the balance of this century. We didn't ask for this, but it is a role that has been placed upon us because of the power that we have and the vacuum of power in Western Europe, which previously had this burden. I believe the dangers of World War III abroad, the dangers of civil war, approaching civil war in a very difficult sense at home, and other problems are greater than this country has ever had. But on the other hand, I believe that never in our nation's history have we had more capability to handle these problems. In other words, the forces that can bring peace and avoid war, the forces that can unite America and reconcile America and bring progress in our cities, are now stronger than they have ever been if they're just brought into play. What we need is leadership. Leadership that will take America's great harnessed power and unharness it and put it to work on the unfinished business at home and the unfinished business abroad. By the accident of where I have been, I've been a congressman, a senator, 8 years at the highest level as vice president, 7 years to travel around the world many, many times and to think about these problems. By reason of that experience, I have thought deeply and have reached some conclusions as to what we ought to do to keep the peace abroad and to restore peace at home. And I think that in the presidency, I would have an opportunity to put some of those conclusions into practice, and that's the reason why I've decided to seek the office.
There has been a lot of criticism of President Johnson, some of it justified, much of it petty and unjustified. There are those that don't like his accent, and there are those that don't like his style, and there are others that don't think he comes over too well on TV. I know how he feels. But my friends, the issue in 1968 is not the Johnson personality, but the Johnson policies. And I say whether you look at America's record abroad or at home, this is not a time to continue with Lyndon Johnson. It's time for new leadership under a Republican president and a Republican administration. It is time to begin. Lyndon Johnson says, let us continue for 4 more years. This is my answer. When the strongest nation in the world can be tied down for 4 years in a war against a fourth-rate military power in Vietnam with no end in sight, when the richest nation in the world cannot manage its own economy, when a nation with the greatest tradition of the rule of law is torn apart by lawlessness, when a nation which has been a symbol of equality of opportunity is torn apart by racial strife, when the President of the United States cannot travel at home or abroad without fear of a hostile demonstration, then I say it's time for new leadership in the United States of America.
Ideas are important to Richard Nixon. He seeks them from a variety of sources. His staff represents a wide range of interests, backgrounds, and beliefs. And they are all young.
Well, one of the great things about my staff is its youth. It's the youngest staff that a presidential candidate has ever had. Perhaps even younger than John Kennedy's staff when he ran for the presidency, although his also was a young staff. And this is good. It's good for me because it bridges the gap, the generation gap, although my daughters, 19 and 21, help to do that. They and their boyfriends that they bring home the dinner. But apart from that, We live in a young nation and in a young world. Half the people in the world right today were born after World War II. And I, who fought in that war and who was part of that generation, need to know what these people are thinking. We live in a world that's looking to the future rather than to the past. And so this young, vigorous, intelligent, exciting staff of mine keeps me involved in the problems of the future and also keeps me from turning too much to the past.
On February 5th, Richard Nixon left New Hampshire to address several thousand students at Wisconsin State University. Nixon would return to New Hampshire, but before he did, he would initiate his campaign in Wisconsin. The primary in that state is only 3 weeks after the New Hampshire primary. The demands of a national political campaign had begun.
Mrs. Nixon, just how do you feel starting out on another campaign? You've been on quite a few yourself, haven't you?
Yes, I have, but they're always exciting, and the one that started in New Hampshire couldn't have been more so. I think even the local people were surprised at the enthusiasm and the size of the crowds and the wonderful spirit of the people.
Well, now, these are very exhausting experiences. Do you have a couple of qualms in the back of your mind about having to face so many months of this?
No, actually, I've done it so many times that I don't, and also my heart is in it. I'm a willing volunteer, I might say.
Is there anything about this campaign that you already sense is different from other campaigns in the past?
Well, not yet. There is enthusiasm, there always has been, but I feel that there's even more. And also by the mail that we receive, I feel that way. I think people now want a man of experience, and they also want a man of principle who has, and I think that fits my husband.
You're in a campaign because you want to do something about the problems of the country and the problems of the world in which the country is involved.
But from your own personal point of view, is there a special joy in politics and campaigning that you find a deep personal satisfaction from that goes beyond what you might be able to do for the country?
You say this, I wouldn't be doing it. I wouldn't be going through this unless I enjoyed doing it. I enjoy meeting people, discussing issues, fighting for my positions, arguing about them, refining them, debating them. Once in the battle, then there is nothing which quite equals the excitement of the battle. How are you? Very nice to see you. Hey.
Thank you. And you're very beautiful. I can see why you're the queen.
And you're are you the queen of the Packers too?
Oh, I sure hope so.
Nice warm day.
Especially in Green Bay in February.
Yeah. You know, after seeing that game on TV. Yeah, they told me to wear those long underwear. I can't stand them. They scratch me. But, good luck.
Oh, my goodness. Nobody can deny. He's a jolly good fellow. He's a jolly good fellow. He's a jolly good fellow.
Hi.
He's a jolly good fellow. He's a jolly good fellow. He's a jolly good fellow. Which nobody can deny. Let's cheer for Mr. Nixon. Thank you for everything.
Dr. Dreyfus, all of the distinguished guests on the platform, and the distinguished members of the audience, it's a very great privilege and an honor for me to be here just prior to the Winter Carnival. I say prior to it. I'm afraid if I got here during the carnival, somebody would ask me to ski. I remember the first time I met Bob Hope in the year 1952, right after having been nominated for the vice presidency.
And we were sitting together at a dinner, and the photographers came up and they said, look at each other. You know, that's how they want to get you in some silly pose. Those are the only ones they'll use, at least with me in them. Anyway, and so we finally turned to each other, and Bob Hope, with that wonderful humor of his, incidentally, he has writers, but he can think too, said, you know, Senator, when we get our noses together, what a wonderful ad for Sun Valley. Just to set the record straight on skiing, I did try it once, but I'm not going to try it now. I have only one knee to give to my country. Now, let me come directly to the subjects of interest, and perhaps what I can do at the outset is to lay a framework, a frame of reference, so to speak, for the questions that I'm sure will follow. Yes, it is a difficult world, and you inherited it, and you didn't create it, and those of us who did create it made a lot of mistakes. But the exciting thing is you can change it. You have the power to change it. The world is changing. It's looking for change. The old isms no longer have their appeal. Communism, socialism, Marxism, yes, even what we call Americanism no longer has the magic appeal that it used to have. The world is looking for the new leadership and the new ideas. And what you do can change the world. And I say to you today, as you go through your studies and as you look at the prospects of the draft and all the other things which I know hang over some of the men here, as well as the fears that perhaps some of the girls may have with regard to that matter, I can say to you, look at the other side. Never has a generation lived in a more exciting time or in a more exciting place than America. And now we're going to find out how exciting, because you're going to ask some very exciting questions. Thank you.
Mr. Vice President, I understand that yesterday...
No, Hubert's coming next week.
Sorry. I mean, former Vice President Nixon.
That's all right, sir.
I understand...
I've been called everything. That's all right.
Mr. Nixon, in describing the approach in this campaign, a lot has been said about a new Mr. Nixon. How do you feel about that?
Well, my wife says I've got less hair than I've had before. You know, the hairline goes back a bit here and there. And of course, I'm older. I'm 55, which is, of course, 7 years older than I was when I ran before in 1960. And of course, I'm more experienced. I know more. I won't make as many mistakes as I might have made had I been elected in 1960. Of course, others discover that I perhaps have a sense of humor, which I think I've always had, but perhaps people didn't see it. Others discover other things that they seem to find for the first time. Let me just answer it this way. Of course, I have changed, but also perhaps the people who are looking at me have changed also. They're looking for a new leadership in this country, and they're taking a fresh look at what I may have to offer. And I, of course, am presenting a new case that I was unable to present and did not present in 1960. To that extent, yes, I am new, but in another sense, I'm not. I'm really the most difficult man in the world when it comes to a so-called public relations firm. Nobody's going to package me. Nobody's going to make me put on an act for television. I'm not going to engage in any gimmicks or any stunts, wear any silly hats, do something for the purpose of getting a publicity picture or the rest. I am not an actor. I'm not a good actor. I'm just going to be myself. And so when people say to me that I've got to change myself, take lessons about how to stand, how to talk, how to act, look in the mirror, listen to my voice on radio, look at myself on television, the answer is I never have, and I'm not going to start now. if there is anything I do have to offer to the American people and to leadership as far as our view in our role in the world is concerned, it's the fact that I believe deeply in what I say and that I am myself, and I'm going to continue to play that role. If people looking at me say that's a new Nixon, then all that I can say is, well, maybe you didn't know the old Nixon.
Which nobody can deny. Let's have a real cheer for Mr. Nixon.
During campaign 2016, C-SPAN takes you on the road to the White House as we follow the candidates on C-SPAN, C-SPAN Radio, and cspan.org.
Each week, American Artifacts takes you to museums and historic places to learn what artifacts reveal about American history. Next, we visit the Alexandria Apothecary Museum located in Virginia, just outside of Washington, D.C., which was operated by the same family for over a century. We'll learn about what an apothecary does and how medicine has changed over the years.
My name is Gretchen Bulova, and I am the director of the Stabler-Leadbeater Apothecary Museum in Alexandria, Virginia. The museum is owned and operated by the city of Alexandria. Today we're going to look at the Stabler-Leadbeater Apothecary Museum and learn a little bit more about its history. Alexandria in the 1790s is really a booming economy. It's a thriving seaport. There's a lot of new construction in town. A lot of people are starting to move to the city. Edward Stabler moves from Leesburg to Alexandria in 1792, and he opens a small shop just a couple doors down from here today. He moves to this location in 1805 and then incorporates the building next door into his business and uses that as his warehouse. So an apothecary in this time period is where people went to essentially see the doctor. Most people didn't actually see a doctor. They went to the apothecary, they told him what was wrong, and they mixed up something to help cure what ailed them.
In the 18th century, doctors were trained generally by university, so they would go through a formal set of courses to learn their practice and trade. They would often not have their own practice the way we think of them today, where you go to a doctor's office. They would go to your house. So because they're performing home visits, things were a little bit more expensive. So if you were an average citizen in Alexandria, Virginia in the 18th century, you would often solve your ailments by going to an apothecary. You would explain your symptoms. Apothecaries had anywhere from 4 to 7 years of apprentice training, both in the formal setting where they would read reference books, but also learning about herbs and roots and barks and things like that they would be able to take the properties that each of these had, mix them up into a medicine, and then prescribe to their patients. So in Edward Stabler's time in the late 18th century, after you served your apprenticeship and perhaps opened your own apothecary business, you would keep up on emerging trends in medicine and also the drug business by reading journals and also reference books that were produced, learning about different properties and sort of regulating how medicine was produced. As the 19th century went on into the 20th century, there were regulations and a general consensus on a pharmacopoeia. So there would be a list of drugs that were regulated and prescribed and used in recipes for medicines. Some of the tools of the trade for Edward Stabler in the 18th century and the Leadbeaters into the 19th and 20th century would have been the mortar and pestle. A lot of people recognize it today from cooking and grinding herbs and things like that, but it would have been used to grind herbs, barks, roots into the powders used to produce a lot of the medicines. To get the right ingredients in the right quantities, you would have used a measuring scale much like this, which is a mid to late 19th century scale. Other things that would have been used in the trade in the 19th century would have been a cork press much like this. So you've got a different cork size, and you would wet the cork, you would put it through the cork press to make it smaller. Once you had finished filling the bottle with your medicine, you would then use your condensed cork, and it would expand to fit, forming a seal. The raw ingredients that would have been ground in the mortar and pestle would have been often combined with alcohol. You would have used a pill roller or hand rolled the ingredients that were now in sort of a pill form. You would have often coated them in chocolate or gelatin, so they were easier to take for the customer. So if you were a customer at Edward Stabler's time in the 1790s, you would purchase your medicine in a bottle similar to this. So everything was hand blown. Bottles would have been a little bit more expensive. And in his early period, up to about the beginning of the 19th century, you would import a lot of bottles from overseas. As glass factories started to emerge in America, obviously things became a little bit cheaper. They became a little bit more routine and easy to buy. So you would you'd buy something that was formed in a mold and a bit more uniform. As the 1850s emerged, the use of gold foil and fancy labels as a display, so similar to a lot of the bottles that you see here, that the Leadbeaters kept over the years when they acquired the business, because they are very pretty and they house the raw ingredients, so they do the job of putting raw ingredients, compounding, and making them into medicine, sort of a festive thing. It's very pretty, it's more professional, things like that. So you can see their collection over the years of the bottles for the different raw ingredients that were used to produce the medicines. So some of the ingredients that you see in these bottles would have been readily recognizable to a lot of not only customers in the late 18th century, but also to today's public, such as cinnamon. And also we have a little bit of cinchona. So normally that's made from bark, and it's was thought to, starting in the 1820s, cure malaria. So it's forms quinine. So very popular drug that's still in use today. A little bit of myrrh. You've got just regular alcohol you could have used in any number of medicines. Now, some of the things that you'll notice is that some of these bottles have very thin necks and some have very wide necks. So anything that was a powder or a bark type of ingredient would have had a larger neck so that you could get the product out and makes it easier to mix up. Anything that's liquid would have had what they call a tincture neck. So you wouldn't have needed a large spout for it. Just a small spout would have worked perfectly. So one of the things we're also very lucky to have in our collection is an extensive collection of paper labels that the Stablers and Leadbeaters would have applied to something that they were either retailing or had concocted and to give to their customers. And it ran the gamut from things that we consider to be pure medicine to things that are floor oil or mothballs or things like that. So we do know the full extent of the products that they sold and marketed to their customers. In our collection, we have lots of products that would be recognizable not only to people in the 19th century, but also to today's customers. So you'll see Listerine. One of the things that Listerine was known for is inventing the word halitosis. It was not actually a word in the vernacular, but you know what? It helped them to sell them a product that people were recognizing, yeah, maybe I do have bad breath. Maybe I need something for it. So you'll see Vicks Cough Drop, which has a lot of camphor in it, which helps to ease the breathing when you're sick. You'll see Pepto-Bismol, and then some other things like Kidney Cure. You'll see a renal compound, balsam of wild cherry that people would have used if you had a cold, and things like that. So some other things that we have in our collection include a lot of poison bottles and also some bloodletting equipment. So in the 18th and 19th century, not everyone could read. And so what you wanted to do, if you gave someone something that could potentially be very harmful to them or even kill them, you wanted them to be aware that there was some precautions that they should take with some of the medicines. So you'll see what was recognized in the early 19th century and mid 19th century as something that included poison would be these blue bottles with small bumps on them. So that would have been a sign for someone that perhaps there was something that they should be aware of in the medicine. We've got some bloodletting devices. In the 18th century and a little bit in the 19th century, there was thought that there were too many humors in the body, and so that some of the extra humors needed to be drained out in terms of draining some blood. and they would do it in specific amounts, sometimes up to a quart of blood, and that would bring into balance some of the humors in your body. So some different ways you could do it. We had a small lancet that we know that Edward Stabler in the 1790s and 1800s sold quite a few of. You could buy a fancier set, or you could buy a much more mundane, less fancy device. But up top, you've got our scarificator. So that is essentially a much more industrial version of a lancet. So what you would do is you'd place it against the skin. It was spring loaded. You would release the spring. It would go directly into your veins, and then you would drain the blood out. So while Edward Stabler sold lancets and scarificators, he wasn't necessarily performing this service at the shop. He would prescribe them to doctors such as Elijah Cullen Dick, which was one of Washington's doctors, and they would purchase the scarificators and also the lancets to use in their own private practice. Bloodletting was often done not in an office that we think of today, a doctor's office, but it would be done in your home by someone who was trained to do that.
Edward Stabler was a devout Quaker and was very dedicated to his faith. He actually became an elder in his faith, and that really became the focus of where he was taking this next stage in his life. And he then turned the business over to his oldest son, William. So the business transfers really from Edward Stabler to William. The name Stabler Leadbeater, while the apothecary stays in the same family for 141 years, it does transfer through marriage. So John Leadbeater had been working here with William Stabler and fell madly in love with William's sister, and came back to work here and took ownership, and it switches then in the family from Stabler to Leadbeater. It's really under John Leadbeater that the building gets remodeled to the way it looks today. By 1852, it has a new interior that you can see with the gingerbreading and a more updated Gothic revival style, because they were trying to stay current and trying to keep attracting a new, fresh clientele. They had a pretty loyal customer base, and in fact we have a lot of the primary source ledgers and letters and orders and prescription files in our collection. And it's really quite a treasure. It's an extensive archival collection. And so we can tell who's shopping here, what they're purchasing, what the prices are for the products that they're purchasing. And they're getting people coming in off the street, but they still have like a who's who in Alexandria customer order. One of Edward Stabler's most prominent patrons is Martha Washington, and on April 22nd, 1802, she sends a letter requesting his best bottle of castor oil, and has that sent to Mount Vernon. And sadly, she passes away just a month later on May 22nd from bilious fever. Robert E. Lee is another prominent name that most of our visitors take away from the tour. And Robert E. Lee, we have in some of our ledgers that he purchased whitewash for Arlington House, and he also purchased lavender as well. And lavender was a great remedy for migraines. At the peak of the business, the family was operating out of 11 different buildings here in town. This was retail. They also had a retail on King Street, the corner of King and Fairfax. They loved the history associated with this space, and they almost had it set up as a little museum. I mean, they were very into the history and the fact that they had served the community and so many prominent Alexandrians throughout their time. Up through the Civil War, he was starting to increase the business to start to include a wholesaling line of products. And with the Civil War, Alexandria was occupied, and because the The family was Quakers, they were pacifists, they were also abolitionists. They were allowed to keep running a business here in town. After the Civil War, the economy of Alexandria slowly starts to recover. And John Leadbeater, with the assistance of his son, Edward Stabler Leadbeater, start to wholesale products in 3 different states, 500 different businesses locally in the region. And that really helps them expand their business, they expand their product line, and they really become well known in the area.
The room you're standing in right now is the what we refer to as the manufacturing room. So it was where a lot of the raw ingredients were stored by beginning in Edward Stabler moving to this building in 1805, all the way through the 20th century when they closed, where they were using it more as an office space, also as storage. So this room would have been used to store raw ingredients. Now the raw ingredients would have been purchased in the 18th century by Edward Stabler through merchants not only in the United States, in Philadelphia, New York, but they also would have been purchased from as far away as London. There were many apothecary vendors that would have sold bulk raw ingredients to apothecaries here in the United States. It would have taken roughly a month to get any raw ingredients over via ship, but we were very lucky in that Alexandria in the 18th century was a thriving seaport, and so a lot of these ingredients, which would have been very expensive farther west or farther south, would have been readily available to him for him to sell to his customers. So as the 19th century progressed, the Leadbeaters not only were working on their thriving retail business, but they had expanded to have their own line of products. One of the things that was in their line of products was the pure sweet oil. So it would be made from almond or olive oil, and it could be used as a hair tonic. You could use it to alleviate earaches. You could use it for to alleviate any tummy aches. You could also use it for cooking. So in the 19th and early 20th century, other products that would have been wholesaled under the Leadbeater name would have been things like they made their own brand of paints. You can see all the different varieties of colors here. You would have also had a line of extracts and flavorings for food, for ice creams, for sundaes, for cooking, things like that. And those were very popular. In the early 20th century, in response to a lot of the influenza outbreaks in the United States, the Leadbeaters had their own proprietary brand of medicine to deal with that, and it was called Quibon. It killed chills, the grippe, and it was a chocolate-covered pill, so it would have been a little bit easier for everyone to take and a little bit more flavorful. When the Leadbeaters took over the business, they preserved a lot of the same original layout of this manufacturing room. So a lot of the same drawers, a lot of the same cabinets, things like that would have been preserved as they were used in the 18th century and also into the 19th and 20th century. When the business declared bankruptcy in 1933, a lot of the remaining contents were preserved just as they were when the business was open. So in the beginning of the 19th century, a space much like this would have been used by Edward Stabler to conduct business and answer letters, do any sort of accounting in his day books and account books to keep things up to date with his customers. As the 19th century went on and into the late 19th century and early 20th century, additional buildings that the Leadbeaters had purchased on the corner of King Street and South Fairfax Street would have been used as a more formal office because they needed a lot larger office space. So in this space during the late 19th and early 20th century, you would have had bookkeepers and secretaries working on this floor, dealing with the, communicating with the wholesale customers and also the vendors or suppliers as far away as Philadelphia, Boston, New York.
Over time, as we hit the 20th century, it has a slow period of decline, and they do shut their doors by 1933. Part of that is the Depression, part of it is they're not able to change from wholesaling back to retailing fast enough to meet the demands of the changing economies here in the United States. But they do close their doors in 1933. Manuel Hendler of Baltimore buys a good portion of the contents of the buildings at public auction. And then the Landmarks Society preserves the two buildings that we know today as the Apothecary Museum, preserves those and then opens them as a museum for 1939. The Landmarks Society operates these two buildings as a museum through much of the 20th century. By 2006, they were looking to donate the buildings to the city of Alexandria. The buildings underwent a full restoration where the second floor was opened, and that was the first time that the public was able to see the manufacturing room on the second floor. So the buildings have been operated since 2006 by the city of Alexandria. Thank you for visiting the Apothecary Museum with us today. The Apothecary Museum is open year-round and for a nominal admission fee, and we encourage you to come by for a tour and to learn more about Alexandria and the history of medicine and just more about life as an early business person here in Alexandria.
You can watch this and other American Artifacts programs by visiting our website at cspan.org/history.
This year, C-SPAN is touring cities across the country, exploring American history. Next, a look at our recent visit to Montgomery, Alabama. You're watching American History TV, all weekend, every weekend on C-SPAN 3.
Welcome to Alabama State Camp. The Alabama State Camp is a very old historic facility. This camp goes from Civil War to Civil Rights, with 104 years in between. We're among the most historic campuses in the United States of America for three reasons. One is we have a six-pointed star here marking the location that Jefferson Davis stood to take the oath of office to become the first and only president of the Confederate States of America. This is the Star of David. Jefferson Davis didn't stand on the star. Sophie Bibb was the president of the Daughters of the Confederacy. She had the star cut in place here. That was February the 18th, 1861. The Confederate was here until May 20th, 1861. 104 years later is when Dr. King led the Voters' Right March up Dexter Avenue. It was between the two columns here where Governor Wallace stood and delivered his first inaugural address.
I draw the line in the dust and toss the gauntlet before the feet of tyranny, and I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
That's three historic events that took place here and nowhere else in the world, placing us on the register of historic places through the Interior Department. Montgomery became the camp in 1846. It burned to the ground in 48. And in 1851, the current camp was built back on the same foundation. This is an 1851 structure. We have just walked inside of the Alabama State Camp, the Dexter Avenue entrance, and we're very proud of this. We're dominated here with a pair of spiral staircases going up 3 flights, and this is the only pair in the United States of America. We're proud to have it in our camp, whereas Horace King plays a large role in the design of this camp. Horace King, a self-taught mathematician, covered bridge engineer. He was born into slavery. Couldn't get credit for this masterpiece because he was a slave. His master, John Godwin, after this project was complete, petitioned to the Tuscaloosa Business Council for his freedom. During the Reconstruction, Horace King returned to Montgomery, Alabama, staged a campaign here, and was the first black to serve in the legislature in Alabama State Capitol. This is a bust, a statue of Lurleen Byrne Wallace. Lurleen Byrne Wallace is the first and only female governor the state of Alabama has ever had. She was elected to serve the state of Alabama 4 years as governor. 16 months into that tour, she died of cancer. Now, we are one of 2 states in the United States of America with an elected husband and wife team as governor. The Wallaces served Alabama in the 60s. The Fergusons served Texas in the 20s. Now, we have had them all as governors of the state of Alabama. Governor Winston White on the campaign trail to become governor of the state of Alabama, committed a murder, but the person he shot and killed was his wife lover, and when they went to court, it was ruled as justifiable homicide, so he was not convicted of murder, which allowed him then to go on and become governor of Alabama. This is Governor Clay. Governor Clay married his first cousin. This is Governor Reuben Chapman. He closed state government down at the age of 39 and married a 16-year-old girl. This is a working museum. We only have 4 elected officials working here. Governor Robert Bentley is the 53rd governor of Alabama since 1819. He and his immediate crew is behind the brown doors. This is the south wing. On the south wing, we have Alabama State Treasurer, the Secretary of State, and State Audit, and along with the governor. Now, those are the only 4 elected officials that has permanent space in Alabama State Capitol. We are now moving into the old Supreme Court chamber. The Supreme Court met in here from 1851 to 1884. Today they meet on Dexter Avenue, just 2 blocks down. This is a very historic room. The casket carrying the remains of Jefferson Davis from Louisiana to Richmond, Virginia, lied at state between these 2 columns for 5 hours. Now you can see the casket over there in the picture. Mrs. Davis was a very passionate woman. In her book she wrote, as the train rolled into Montgomery, Alabama, she felt that it was fitting to allow the train to stop in here and let the casket lie at state among those he loved so much and those who loved him so much. We are now on the 3rd floor Alabama State Capitol. We are inside of Alabama State Capitol Dome. In the Capitol Dome, we have seals below and mirrors above. I'll explain. We became a state in 1819. This is William Wyatt Bibb drafting up the first Constitution in Huntsville, Alabama. He was appointed by James Monroe, who was president of the United States at that time. Now, seals here on the other level, they are identical to books. They have a definite beginning and a definite ending. Between 1861 and 1865, the Confederate States of America was formed. There was 11 states in the Confederate States, 13 original colonists. Jefferson Davis was the first and only president. Our state name is Alabama. That's a Native American name. Most of the cities in Alabama are Native American names. This is Chief Tuscaloosa. He's the one who led the strife in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. That's where Tuscaloosa get its name. But they didn't spell it with a T. They spell it with a K, just like they said. Tuscaloosa. Tuscaloosa, Alabama, named after Chief Tuscaloosa. We are now entering into the old Senate chamber. In the Senate chamber, we have 35 chairs. There's 35 members in Alabama State Senate. We housed the Senate in this room from 1851 to 1985. Now, this is the most historic room in the Capitol. It is because of the Confederate States of America. The Confederate States of America was formed in here. Jefferson Davis worked in this room from February the 18th, 1861 to May 20th, forming the 11 Confederate states. The lights in here are identical to what was in here in 1851. The difference is they were either oil or gas fired then. They're all electric fired now. Now the space above, that's the galleries. That's where ordinary people come to watch the lawmakers make the laws we all have to abide by. And again, we housed the Alabama State Senate in this room from 1851 to 1985. The last room we're going to tour today is the old House of Representatives chamber. And in this chamber, there's 105 chairs. There's 105 members in Alabama State House of Representatives. We housed the representative in this room from 1851 to 1985. Now, this room is used on a continuous basis, but the main purpose of the room today is for the governor of Alabama to deliver his or her State of the State address. Every State of the State address delivered in Alabama since 1851 has been delivered from this podium. We're going to continue that.